The rope snapped tight as Ava hung upside down from a warehouse ceiling beam, wrists bound behind her, blood hammering behind her eyes. The cartel boss walked a slow circle beneath her. His men laughed. He didn't. He stopped directly beneath her, looking up. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months you sat in that hospital, smiled at my people, took my money. He tilted his head. You thought you could work for a cartel and the US military at the same time? Ava said nothing. You know what we do to rats, he said. He raised the gun slowly. And that was the exact moment the warehouse lights went out. Every single one. Simultaneously, pitch black. The cartel boss spun toward the darkness. His men raised their weapons. Then the metal door exploded inward. 20 Navy SEALs tore through the smoke. Fast, lethal, and absolutely certain. And Ava, still hanging. Looked down at the SEAL commander through the chaos. It took you long enough. Before we begin, hit subscribe and drop SEAL in the comments. By the end of this story, that word is going to mean something very different to you. Mercy General Hospital looked exactly like what it was. A busy San Diego ER running on coffee, understaffing, and the particular kind of controlled exhaustion that settles into a building when it never fully stops. Tuesday afternoons had their own rhythm. Not quiet exactly, but manageable. The kind of shift where the hardest decisions involved which resident had forgotten to restock Bay 2 and whether the supply room schedule needed another revision. Ava moved through all of it the way she always moved through it, steadily, quietly, without drawing attention to herself in any direction. 6 months in, and her colleagues had reached a comfortable understanding of who she was. Reliable, precise, slightly hard to read. The kind of nurse who somehow always seemed to be in the right place at the right time without ever appearing to hurry. Dr. Caldwell found her competent and unremarkable and had said so twice in her performance reviews. That suited Ava perfectly. What nobody at Mercy General knew, what almost nobody anywhere knew, was that the phone in Ava's left scrub pocket was not the same phone listed on her hospital personnel file. And the supply room she stepped into twice a shift for 30 seconds at a time was not always about supplies. For 6 months, Ava had been running 2 lives inside the same building. During the day, she was a nurse genuinely, completely with real skill and real care for every patient she treated. At night, she fed carefully selected information to a joint military intelligence unit, tracking a cartel operation that ran directly through San Diego's hospital system. The cartel used Mercy General the way other businesses use a post office, moving their people in and out quietly, treating gunshot wounds off the books, running money through medical supply accounts that nobody looked at closely enough. Ava had been placed inside that building specifically because of where it sat in that corridor. Her nursing license was real. Her competence was real. Her reason for being there was classified above the pay grade of everyone she worked alongside. 3 months in, a cartel-connected patient came through Bay 3 on a quiet Wednesday evening. Ava treated him. A conversation happened. Small, careful, the kind that could mean nothing or everything depending on who was in the room. Word traveled back to the cartel boss that the nurse in Bay 3 might be open to certain arrangements. Ava let that word travel. Let herself be approached over the following 2 weeks with the patient performance of someone who was weighing her options. Let herself be recruited slowly and convincingly, giving Reyes's network just enough real information to build genuine trust, while feeding everything that actually mattered upward through a channel so clean it had no name attached to any document. For 3 months, it worked exactly as designed. The cartel thought they had a useful nurse. They had a door open straight into the center of their operation. And Ava went home after every shift, made tea, and slept without difficulty. Then 4 days ago, someone made a phone call they should not have made. Not much was sold, just a name, a hospital. And the suggestion that the nurse feeding the military information was the same nurse Reyes had been trusting for 3 months. That was enough. Reyes did not panic. He was not the kind of man who panicked. He was the kind of man who went very quiet and very methodical and started making arrangements. He believed Ava was a civilian who had gotten greedy. Someone playing both sides for money the way certain people did when they found themselves sitting at the intersection of 2 worlds that both paid well. He did not know she was military trained. Did not know her background. Did not know that the gap between what he thought she was and what she actually was had just become the most important distance in San Diego. He simply knew she was a rat. And he knew what he did with rats. And the parking structure behind Mercy General was quiet at the end of the evening shift. 2 of Reyes's men were fast and professional about it. The kind of fast that came from doing something enough times that it stopped requiring thought. Ava went through the motions of a frightened woman, struggled enough to be convincing, made enough noise to be believable in the van with her wrists bound and a blindfold pressing against her eyes. She did what she had been trained to do in exactly this situation. She counted every turn of the wheel, every straight stretch of road, every change in speed. She built a map in the dark with the focused patience of someone who understood that the information available to her right now in this van in this darkness. Okay. Before anyone realized she was paying attention was going to matter more than anything else that happened tonight. 23 minutes. The smell of salt water, industrial sounds, waterfront. The warehouse was cold and high ceiling and smelled like rust and old water. The rope was already in place, hanging from a ceiling beam like it had been waiting. Reyes's men hoisted her up, and the rope snapped tight, and suddenly the floor was 6 feet below her, and the blood was already beginning its slow hammer behind her eyes, and her hair was brushing the cold concrete, and Reyes was standing beneath her, looking up with the satisfied expression of a man who had been hunting something for a long time, and had finally closed his hand around it. His 4 men stood at various points around the warehouse. 2 of them were laughing. Reyes was not laughing. He walked his slow circle beneath her, studying her the way a careful man studies something before he decides what it is worth. Then he stopped, looked up, and said 6 months with the quiet certainty of someone reading a sentence they already knew the ending of. In Ava's left ear, the earpiece sat flat against her skin, exactly where she had taped it before the shift ended. Cole's voice had been steady and clear through the van ride and the first 4 minutes inside the warehouse. Then Reyes nodded at one of his men and a signal jammer the size of a paperback book came out of a bag in the corner and Cole's voice cut out mid-sentence, and the earpiece went completely silent and Ava was alone in a warehouse 6 feet off the ground with a cartel boss standing beneath her who had just reached for the weapon at his hip. And the only thought running through her head, calm, clear, and completely certain, was that Cole had exactly 12 minutes to move the breach team into position, 12 minutes, and she had absolutely no way of knowing if he still had that long. 12 minutes was not a long time. In a hospital, it was enough time to change a dressing, update 2 charts, and argue briefly with a resident about something that did not matter. In a warehouse in the San Diego waterfront district, hanging upside down 6 feet off the ground with a signal jammer running in the corner and a cartel boss standing beneath you with a weapon at his hip. 12 minutes felt like a currency she was already spending faster than she was earning it. Ava controlled her breathing the way she had been taught to control it in conditions considerably worse than this one. Slow, deliberate, pulling the air down into the bottom of her lungs where panic could not reach it. The blood behind her eyes was a pressure she catalogued and set aside. The discomfort in her wrists where the rope bit was information she registered and filed away. None of it was the problem. The problem was the silence in her left ear and the 12 minutes and the cartel boss who had just stopped laughing and started thinking, which was in her experience always the more dangerous version of him. Reyes did not shout. That was the first thing anyone who underestimated him got wrong. He was not loud about it. He put the weapon back at his hip, not because the threat was gone, but because a weapon pointed at someone who was already suspended 6 feet off the ground was theater, and Reyes had no interest in theater. He was interested in information. He wanted to know exactly how deep the exposure went, which of his routes had been compromised, which of his people had been identified, how far up the chain the leak had traveled, and how long it had been traveling. He asked his questions the way a careful accountant reviews a ledger, methodically, without emotion, looking for inconsistencies rather than confessions. Ava gave him the performance of a frightened woman trying to negotiate her way out of a room. Partial admissions, careful hesitations, the body language of someone deciding in real time how much truth was enough to stay alive. It was a convincing performance. It was built on genuine understanding of what real fear looks like from the outside, which is a thing you learn when you have spent enough time in rooms where the fear was not a performance at all. Vargas had been arguing since the van. He stood at the edge of the warehouse floor with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had already made his decision and was waiting impatiently for everyone else to catch up to it. Every time Reyes paused between questions, Vargas filled the silence quietly enough that it stayed between the two of them, but loud enough that Ava, hanging 6 feet above the conversation, could hear the shape of it, even if she could not catch every word. He wanted to skip the questions. And Reyes kept him back with a single look each time. The look of a senior man communicating to a junior one that patience was not weakness, and that information was worth more than satisfaction. This argument was Ava's oxygen. Every minute it continued was a minute the breach team was using. She tracked it the way she tracked a patient's vitals. Not with anxiety, but with the steady clinical attention of someone monitoring something that mattered. 3 m away, Cole had a problem that had nothing to do with Ava and everything to do with the next 4 minutes. One of Reyes's outer perimeter guards had moved off his expected pattern. Reposition now at a point that put him directly in the breach team's primary entry corridor. Removing him quietly required time that was compressing fast. Removing him loudly eliminated surprise and turned a controlled breach into a firefight with Ava in the middle of it. Cole stood outside the operations vehicle in the San Diego night air and made the call in under 30 seconds the way he made every call by identifying the least bad option and committing to it completely. He pushed the timeline 6 minutes, cut the earpiece transmission so Ava could not accidentally react to something she heard, and signaled to Reyes that the timid had shifted. He knew she would understand the silence. He had worked with her long enough to know that her silence and her stillness were never the same thing. That behind both of them, something precise and operational was always running. He was betting on that. He was, if he was being honest with himself, betting everything on that. And inside the warehouse, Reyes had moved from his opening questions into something more specific. He had been watching her face while she answered, and he was good at reading faces. It was one of the reasons he had survived in his business as long as he had. He could see the fear. He believed the fear, but underneath it there was something else that he could not quite name yet, a quality of steadiness that did not belong to a civilian woman trying to talk her way out of a bad situation. It nagged at him the way a wrong number nags. Small enough to dismiss, persistent enough to stay. He stopped mid-question, his head tilted slightly, the specific movement of a man whose instincts have sent him a message that his conscious mind has not finished reading. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded at the man nearest the wall. The search was thorough and professional and took less than 2 minutes. They found the earpiece first, flat against the skin behind her left ear, taped down with the kind of precision that spoke to practice rather than improvisation, found the wire along her left side. 30 seconds after that, Reyes took the earpiece from his man and held it between 2 fingers and looked at it with the focused attention of someone reading a document that has just changed the meaning of every document that came before it. The warehouse went quiet in a new way. Not the quiet of men waiting for an order, but the quiet of men recalibrating. Vargas stopped arguing. That more than anything told Ava how the temperature in the room had shifted. Reyes looked up at her. The comfortable certainty of managing a civilian problem had left his face completely. What replaced it was colder and more specific and considerably more dangerous. If you have ever had to stay completely calm while everything around you was falling apart, comment Steele below. Because what Ava did in the next 30 seconds required something most people will never have to find in themselves. He looked up at her for a long time. The earpiece still held between his fingers. His voice when it came was almost conversational, the tone of a man asking a genuine question rather than making a threat. "Who are you?" he said, not angrily. The way a person says it when they have just realized that the answer is going to be more complicated than anything they prepared for. Ava held his gaze from 6 feet above him. And before she could decide what version of the truth was most useful right now, the warehouse wall shook with a sound like controlled thunder. Once, twice, 4 times in rapid sequence, and every head in the room turned toward the metal door, and Rehe spun away from her, and his men raised their weapons, and the signal jammer in the corner did absolutely nothing about what was coming through that door because breach charges do not need a signal, and Cole had not pushed the timeline back at all. He had moved it forward. The metal door did not bend. It did not buckle or groan or give any of the dramatic warning that doors and movies give before they come apart. It simply ceased to exist as a barrier. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was traveling inward at speed and blown off its frame by 4 breach charges placed at 4 specific structural points by people who had done this enough times that it had stopped being exciting and become simply technical. The smoke came first, thick and fast and moving in the specific way that smoke moves when it has been generated deliberately rather than accidentally. Then the lights, not the warehouse lights. Those had gone out 30 seconds earlier when Cole's team cut the external power supply to the building as the first stage of the breach sequence. These were tactical lights, sharp and narrow, and moving fast, cutting through the smoke in straight lines that swept the warehouse floor with the efficient geometry of people who had mapped this building from satellite imagery 48 hours ago and knew exactly where every one of Reyes's men was supposed to be standing. 20 Navy SEALs came through that door in a stack and fanned into the warehouse with the controlled speed of water, finding every available space, fast and certain, and completely without hesitation. The whole entry took less time than it takes to describe it. Reyes's men made their decisions quickly. Some of those decisions were wiser than others. The results in both cases were swift and not in anyone's favor except the people who had come through the door. Vargas, impulsive and loud to the very end, made the least wise decision of anyone in the building and was on the ground in under 4 seconds. The warehouse was loud for approximately 50 seconds. Then it was not loud anymore. Then it was the specific quiet of a space that has just been fully controlled. Men zip-tied on the concrete floor. Weapons cleared and set aside. SEALs moving through post-B breach checks with the methodical focus of people shifting from one phase of an operation to the next. The smoke was already beginning to thin near the blown doorframe. Cold night air moved through the gap where the door had been. Outside was somewhere in the direction of the water. A ship's horn sounded once and went quiet, completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside this building. Reyes did not run toward the breach and he did not run away from it. He was smarter than both of those options. And he proved it by moving the moment the door came in. Not toward the SEALs and not toward the exit, but directly toward Ava. Because he understood immediately and correctly that a hostage was the only currency that retained any value in a room that had just been comprehensively taken apart. He crossed the warehouse floor in under 5 seconds and got both hands on the rope above her ankles. And his grip was strong and his logic was entirely sound. It would have worked. It would have worked against almost anyone else in that building. Ava had been hanging upside down for 28 minutes. The discomfort in her wrist was real. The pressure behind her eyes was real. The restricted circulation in her legs was real.